Hello guys, today I'm going to be doing a video on The Witcher 3, the next gen update, with the RTX 3080. We're going to be starting it off with 1080p at the Ultra Plus settings. Alright, start out display, 1080p, VSync disabled, then for graphics, playing the game at the Ultra Plus settings. Here we are. Alright, let's get going. So we're going to be starting off with DirectX 11. We have two choices, DirectX 11 and DirectX 12 in this game. And with 12 we can use ray tracing and DLSS, and with 11 it's pretty much the old game that we had before. And with the 4090, with my experience, was that DirectX 12 is not as stable. The FPS is a little bit lower than what you get normally, especially at the lower resolutions like 1080p and 440p. So I'm going to be testing out DirectX 11 and 12 in this video, so we can see the comparisons between the two with the 3080, and you guys can decide what you want to choose and what you want to play with. Alright, starting it off at 1080p Ultra Plus settings, we're getting around 120 to 140 FPS. Quite fantastic. The game is stuttering a little bit, but that should go away. This area is quite GPU intensive. There's a lot of vegetation around, so it would hit the GPU very hard. I will go to the inner cities as well at Novigrad. That will hit the CPU as well as the GPU, but it's mainly CPU intensive, so we can see that as well over there. But overall, the game's running quite well. We are getting some dips into the low 100s, but for the most part, we are sitting in the high 100s, which is quite fantastic. The game's looking quite good as well. Can't really complain about the look at all. It doesn't look next gen at 1080p, but if you go to 3080, I would hope you're playing the game at 440p or 4K. Playing the game at 120 FPS in a single player game is a bit excessive, it's a bit overkill. 60 FPS is more than enough pretty much at this game. Anything above that is just, it's a bonus. Okay, let's go ahead and fast travel to Novigrad, the inner city areas, and we can continue from there. Alright, and here we are inside of Novigrad, and quite a bit of an FPS hit, sitting at 90 to 80 FPS. Should be sitting at 75% usage, but overall the game's running quite well, not really stuttering too much. We are getting some occasionally, to be honest, but it's so rare that I don't think it's going to ruin the experience too much anyway. Wow, look at the GPU usage, sitting at 60%. This GPU is getting bottlenecked like crazy in the city. Wow. Okay, looks good. I'm going to go ahead and restart, use DirectX 12, and we can continue from there. And after a quick restart, I'm back using DirectX 12. One thing I forgot to mention is that the overlay doesn't work with DirectX 12, it only works with DirectX 11. Same goes with the Steam overlay, so you can't use the Steam overlay if you use DirectX 12. So I'm forced to use the Nvidia one, but it does the job, so it's fine by me. Now as you can see, FPS is sitting in the 70s, and if you remember from DirectX 11, we're getting around 110 to 140 FPS, so FPS is far lower than what we had before in DirectX 11. Now this mode isn't really useful if you're not going to be using ray tracing or DLSS, and for 1080p you don't need DLSS anyway with this card. It's way too overkill regardless, so I would just avoid that at 1080p. Just use DirectX 11, it's far more stable, far smoother, and you get better performance, so you don't need any of those extra features. But if you want to use ray tracing, then I guess we'll get to that part, but then you're forced into using DirectX 12, so your FPS will be far worse. We're still getting some stutters, by the way. The game's not perfectly smooth at this point. FPS is in the 60s, but again, the stuttering is just too much. Alright, the game crashed, but I restarted and I'm back. Same settings as before at Ultra Plus, and we're getting 57 FPS. And if you're wondering if DLSS can help us here, it can't because GPU is not even maxed out. It's sitting at 70% usage. And all DLSS does is that it gives us an extra headroom on the GPU side of things. So if the GPU is already bottlenecked, it can't improve the performance. It will stay the same. In this area, we were sitting at 60 to 70 FPS, I believe, so it's not as bad as what it was outside of the city in the bushy areas. But still, below 60 FPS experience at 1080p with pretty much a top-end system. Alright, and here we are with ray tracing at 1080p at Ultra Plus settings. Now, keep this in mind that this will be different than the variants on console. PS5 and Series X will have different settings for ray tracing. They don't get reflections or shadows, they get ambient occlusion and global illumination. I could be wrong, but I think that's what they get. So on the PC, it will be far more intensive, just keep that in mind. But yeah, 1080p, we're getting 44 FPS with Ultra ray tracing. Let's get down here to the lake area. You can see the reflections. Alright, and here we are during the day. And would you look at that? Look how nice the reflections look. Incredible. It looks so much better. They look insanely good, to be honest. Even at 1080p, it's definitely worth using in my opinion. FPS is not going to be good, obviously. But man, they look good. Kind of wish they added screen space reflections to the settings as well, so we weren't forced to use RT. But this is what we get. And this is how it runs. It looks fantastic, but FPS is far lower, sitting in the 50s. GPU sitting at 70% usage. So we went from getting around 110 to 140 FPS at 1080p Ultra Plus settings with DirectX 11 to only getting 40 FPS with everything cranked up to its max value. But the game crashed and now the overlay doesn't work. We're missing the GPU clocks, the memory clocks, the temperatures, the fan speeds, the GPU power, and the voltage. That's not very good, but I just want to see the FPS before I restart the computer again. FPS is going to be sitting in the mid 30s up to the low 40s. Look at the reflections here though. Looks fantastic. I love it. I love the lighting, the reflections, the shadows, they all look amazing. It definitely adds to the game, but I wish the FPS was better. And I wish it wasn't as stuttery as what you get here. Alright, I won't spend too much time. Just going to push it up to 440p Ultra Plus settings at DirectX 11. I'll come back when that's done. Alright, and here we are at 440p Ultra Plus settings. Using DirectX 11. GPU is fully maxed out. And FPS is sitting at the 90s up to the low 100s. Looking pretty good. I don't want to spend too much time on this. I just want to show you guys how it should run as the base level and then move on to DirectX 12 and show you guys how it will run if you leave it to its default settings. So yeah, FPS is sitting in the 90s up to the 110s. It's quite good performance if you ask me. It really is the sweet spot for this card. 440p Ultra settings. It runs it like nothing. Super easy for this card. And here we are, Ultrra, getting 100 FPS. Fantastic to be honest. GPU's almost maxed out. Occasionally we get some dips into the 70s, which will bring the GPU usage down into the 80% mark. But normally we're sitting at 95%, which is pretty much maxed out. Quite fantastic, but this is not what we're going to be getting. With DirectX 12, we're going to be sitting in the 50s again, and even the 40s, which is unfortunate. Alright, and here we are with DirectX 12. Play for a little bit, but not for too long, because we already know how it's going to run. It will sit around the same FPS as what we had at 1080p. 4K will be the only one that will be different, because it will be far more GPU intensive. But at 440p and 1080p, it's going to be running the same pretty much. And with ray tracing enabled, we're getting around 30 FPS, 35 FPS. GPU is fully maxed out. It's running quite poorly at this point. The game feels very jumpy. It's like rubber banding, it feels like, actually. It's pretty poor performance. Wow, look how laggy that is. He's like skipping. He's like stutter stepping. That's awful. Just at 30 FPS. Wow. How will this run in Ultrra? I wonder. Probably like 25 FPS. And using DLSS, set to balance, we're getting 40 FPS now, 44 FPS. So we're getting around 10 FPS. GPU sitting at 87% up to the low 90s. Quite decent. Oh, it does get maxed out occasionally as well still. But FPS is sitting in the 40s pretty much, so we gain 10 FPS. Quite good. The game feels far better. Doesn't feel as stuttery as what it was before. And the quality looks just as good, surprisingly, at 440p to run the game at native 440p, which is fantastic. It's not perfect, not 60 FPS, but it is what it is. It is running decently well with maxed out RT. Alright, and here we are, Ultrra, and we're barely getting 30 FPS and the game is flickering a bunch on the right. Okay, never mind, 40 FPS, it bumped itself back up. Very nice. Doesn't feel the smoothest to be honest. 30 FPS anyway, with DLSS enabled by the way. This has DLSS enabled and we're barely getting 30 FPS. GPU sitting at 40% usage. This is very disappointing. Disabling DLSS, we're getting 31 FPS anyway. We're just getting bottlenecked heavily at this point, that it doesn't matter that we use DLSS or not, unfortunately. Alright, and here we are at 4K with the Ultra Plus settings, with DirectX 11, just at 60 FPS. Oh, this game looks fantastic, man, looks beautiful. Looking at the reflections here, as you can see, there's basically none. Looks very bland. So the game is stuttering a lot at this point, but hopefully that will go away. Here I'm sitting at 5 gigs of usage, which is not a lot to be honest with this card. We have 10 gigs available to us. But yeah, FPS is sitting in the low 60s up to the high 60s, which is quite a good range. We might fall down into the 50s, but honestly at that point, you can turn some settings down, play the game at high settings, and you can jump back up to above 60 FPS again. Now I will say the stuttering hasn't gone away yet. It's still there unfortunately, but this wasn't a thing at 440p or 1080p, so those settings are fine. Just at 4K, we are getting a bit more stuttering compared to what we had before. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and push it up to DirectX 12 now, and we can compare the performance there. Alright, and here we are at 4K Ultra Plus settings with DirectX 12, and FPS is getting around 60 FPS, so not much different to DirectX 11, thankfully. But 4K, you can get away with using DirectX 12 it seems like at this point. but we'll see how we go. Using DLSS isn't going to help us much. We're probably getting around 10 FPS, I would say, until we get bottlenecked again. But regardless, I'll try it out and we can see how it performs. So the game's not stuttering anymore with DirectX 12, whereas with DirectX 11, it was stuttering far more often. With DLSS set to performance mode, we're getting 80 FPS. GPU's fully maxed out, and honestly at this point, this is better than DirectX 11. Getting better performance, the game's looking just as good as native 4K. The game's not stuttering, which is a bonus. And yeah, look at that, it's running beautifully. Finally, a setting that makes sense with DirectX 12. I can't really see any blurriness. This area has a lot of vegetation, which doesn't look the best with DLSS, but even then, it's looking fantastic. Okay, we're getting a couple stutters here when I pan the camera, to be honest. I can't even lie about that. But it's far better than DirectX 11, that's for sure. Alright, let's go ahead and quit to the main menu because the game's going to crash if I fast travel to Novigrad and go from here. Alright, Novigrad, we're getting... Wow. 70 FPS now, seriously? Just at 60 FPS. Yep, getting those dips again back down to the low 50s. At 4K, there's really not much reason to not use DLSS. It's looking fantastic. It's running beautifully as well for the most part. You will have those dips into the 50s unfortunately. And here's the performance with ray tracing at 4K. Getting some popping with the shadows. Game is feeling very laggy, but we're sitting just at 30 FPS. This is playable, right? Surely. Very close to it. 27 FPS was the lowest I've seen it hit. Not very playable. Super stuttery anyway, that a 30 FPS cap isn't going to be helping us much, to be honest. Oh, the game crashed. There it is. Alright, so at 1080p and 440p, you want to stick to DirectX 11. Unless you want to play the game with ray tracing enabled, then you're forced into DirectX 12. At 4K Ultra Plus settings, I would use DirectX 12. It plays better, and you can actually use DLSS, which should give you an additional FPS boost, which is better than DirectX 11 at that point. Ray tracing at 4K, I wouldn't do it. You're going to get 30 FPS. And yeah, I think that's about it. Thank you guys for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys tomorrow for the Witcher 3 on the Steam Deck. See you guys there.